It is really wonderful to be here, and thank you for that nice introduction. When you kind of stack them all together like that, it actually almost sounds a little bit impressive, I guess. But that's the nice stuff. But what I am and what I do and what beats inside my soul is I am a teacher. And I teach and I do some writing. Most of my writing, as you heard, is really on issues of teaching and learning. But it is teaching, it is being around students, it is being there for that moment. And you all know this moment when you can see in their eyes that they actually are getting the stuff you're trying to teach. It's the magic of those moments that I live for. And I'm pleased to say I've had some successes in that, but then there are the other moments. So I received this email from a student you all know where this is going, right? I received this email from a student a few years ago, which I have saved. Little background here, I was doing a simulation. The simulation dealt with, in this particular case, economic development, issues of eminent domain, and I was exploring with students the idea of how it would work if we had a committee that I randomly selected, and that randomly selected committee would act as gatekeepers, or if the students elected that committee, what would happen? Right, trying to get across to them the idea that if you get to vote on who the gatekeepers are, then the gatekeepers become part of the political process. Very much of a political science-y argument that the rules matter, who makes the rules really matter. Which is better? Well, this student sends me a note in all capital letters. If possible, I would like to know the results of the economic development simulation. Was it better to have the panel picked or randomly selected? And I'm sitting there shaking my head. Was it better? Years and years of scholarship dealing with how we choose committees, dealing with the different biases, and you want me to give you an answer in one word, was it better? By 3 p.m., please. Because the papers due at 5. So if we're going to work this through, right? And then there's the next one, a couple of weeks later. Now we're doing a simulation on school prayer. Dr. B, I'm writing my post-simulation paper and I missed the last day. Can you tell me if school prayer should be allowed? Thanks. Sure. Because all of the discussion we have had for over 200 years in the United States, all of the court cases around the First Amendment, really it's just a very simple yes-no answer. And all the work that the Supreme Court has done on this case and all the work that legislators have done is really just window dressing. The answer is no, school prayer should not be allowed, end of story. So you bang your head against a wall, right? You shake your head. I actually took the first email, I printed it out, I hung it in a prominent spot in my office. So anytime I actually thought I was doing a good job as a teacher, I had that note up there just to remind me that there was still work to be done. But it drove something fundamental home to me. It drove a few fundamental things home to me. One of them is, of course, investigating one's own teaching in a scholarly way hurts. It hurts because it forces you to look in the mirror and it forces you to say, I have done some things successfully, but there are cases where I have not achieved what I want. I have a goal for my students with these simulations. And I have many goals. One of my biggest ones is I want my students to get a sense of how we have these issues out there in political science that are unsettled. We don't know what the answer is. We don't know the best way to do local economic development. We don't know whether school prayer should always be allowed or not. And the fun of being a political scientist is engaging in these discussions. It's gathering data. It's questioning what are our assumptions as we think about this. It's coming up with ways to explain and understand our positions, to synthesize so much information. And all of you, working in disciplines that are extraordinarily far from my own, doing things that I really know very, very little about, have those same things going on in your disciplines. Because if we knew the answers, we would have come up with the one best way to rehabilitate someone who has a serious back injury. If we knew the answers, we would have found that anti-cancer vaccine by now. We don't know the answers. The work we do in all of our research is looking at and trying to figure out some answers to some very ill-structured questions where there is no clear yes-no. And I would suggest that a lot of the work we do in the classroom as teachers is really aimed, or should be aimed, at getting our students to journey along with us in trying to figure out what these answers are. Whenever I tell people I teach government, they say, oh, like the 3 branches of government. Right? And I say, oh yes, it's exactly what it is. I stand up there every day and I draw 3 branches of government, and that's what we talk about. And the test is, how many branches of government are there? That's boring. The stuff that we all know, the stuff that you could put out on a handout, give to your students, say, here, take this, that's the boring stuff. It's the inquiry. It's getting our students to think like scholars in a field. That's, I think, what makes our job as teachers interesting. And for many of you who are training professionals, someone who sits in your classroom today as an occupational therapist will be working and making a living in the field 2 years from now. You've got to train them to think like an occupational therapist would. And it involves doing the kinds of things we routinely do. I learned something. I learned something from all of this, which I knew and you know, but it drove home to me the essential difference between teaching and learning. For any baseball fans here, this is the cover. It's kind of hard to see. It is the cover of a book by Jim Bouton. Jim Bouton, of course, known for his baseball classic Ball 4, which, as I told my son, you can read it when you're 30. It's kind of out there. But Bouton's book title, this is his follow-up, or one of his follow-up books, was incredible. I managed good, but boy, did they play bad. The lament of every baseball manager, right? I managed good, but they played bad. And how many times have we thought, I taught good, but boy, did they learn bad? And again, the fault is certainly not always with us. When you grade an exam and a student got a 32, it's probably not worth thinking, God, if I had done my job better, I could have gotten this student to an A. But it does, to my mind, bring up this idea we need to be thinking about, how do I take what I'm doing in teaching and how do I translate it? How to use Bar and Tagg's great term, how do I move myself from the teaching paradigm to the learning paradigm? So with that introduction here, let me now break every rule of PowerPoint by putting up a very long quote in very small print that you can't possibly read. There we go. Okay, so in the back it's all clear, I hope, right? Absolutely, yeah. This is a quote. You have the material. I believe the PowerPoint has been provided to you electronically, so you have this quote. It is from Randy Bass's work. Randy Bass is a professor at Georgetown University. He's been in the administration there. He's former president of the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, a great guy and a wonderful scholar. I'm just going to read pieces of this to you, and hopefully some of this will really resonate. Right? In scholarship and research, having a problem is at the heart of the investigative process. It is the compound of the generative questions around which all creative and productive activity revolves. But in one's teaching, a problem is something you don't want to have. And if you have one, you probably want to fix it. Asking a colleague about a problem in his or her research is an invitation. Asking about a problem in one's teaching would probably seem like an accusation. If you're going to get one sentence out of this, this is the one. Changing the status of the problem in teaching from terminal remediation to ongoing investigation is precisely what the movement of a scholarship of teaching and learning is all about. Your research problems drive your work. They're why you get up and go into the lab or go into wherever you do your research every day. You love talking about research problems. We don't talk about teaching problems. We hide them. We never ask anyone about them. But there's a whole lot of generative work that comes from these types of teaching problems. And I think Randy's formulation here is perfect. It's changing the status of the problem in teaching into something that becomes a drive for research work, a drive, an engine that drives what we do. So let's think about this. How do we make our teaching more inquiry-based? How do we start thinking about our teaching like scholars of teaching and learning? Observation. What do you see? What's going on? Look in your classroom. Notice the things that are so obvious that they become part of the background, but notice more what's going on. Where are we losing our students? Where do their faces turn from understanding to befuddlement? Where do we see them starting to shut off? Watch their faces. Where does the glimmer of recognition fade and the mask of confusion begin? That's a nice phrase. I should remember that. Glimmer of inquiry and evidence. Construct an investigation. Look for artifacts and examples of student learning, and I'll talk about this more. How do we make sense of what we see? And then that last piece, go public. Right? The phrase scholarship of teaching and learning is a very deliberate phrase. Right? Because like all scholarship, if it sits in the desk drawer and no one ever sees it, it's not going to count for your tenure and promotion. It's not going to become part of your scholarly reputation. No one's going to know it. You know, the thing about teaching, and you all know this, it disappears once you shut the door. You do a great class, you found a new way to teach something that you've never been able to teach it well, suddenly you figure out how to really make it work, and then you shut the door and it's gone. For this to be scholarship, for what we're doing to be scholarship of teaching and learning, we've got to go public with it. Do inquiries. Go public. Present at conferences. Write about it. That's important. Lee Shulman, President Emeritus of the Carnegie Foundation, says these similar things. For an activity to be scholarship, it's got to be public, susceptible to peer review and evaluation, and accessible for use and exchange. Right? We've got to help each other do this stuff. Your writing helps others in your field. It helps others who are working on teaching and learning more generally. That's what makes this stuff scholarship. At my campus, and I'll talk a little bit about my campus experience a little more, I've been involved in some discussions where people come forward and say, you know, I'm doing the scholarship of teaching and learning. Just yesterday I read 2 articles and came up with a different way to teach something. And I'll say, you're doing scholarly teaching. But scholarship, you've got to take that next step. It's got to go public, just like scholarship in pharmacy science or history or literature. So Ernie Boyer, in his classic book, Scholarship Reconsidered, talks about different definitions of scholarship, different ways to think about scholarship. He talks about 4 scholarships. The scholarship of discovery, which is what we typically think about when we talk about research, right? Finding out new things. But Boyer also talks about some other things, other types of scholarship. The scholarship of integration, right? Taking material that we already know and bringing it together in a way that integrates what we've learned. The scholarship of application, taking what we're doing in our research and bringing it out into the larger community. And the scholarship of teaching. Colleges and departments have to figure out how they view these types of scholarship. And faculty, particularly untenured faculty, need to get a lay of the land and need to understand what's going to count and what won't count. I can tell you at Eastern that without actually citing Boyer, and we don't cite Boyer, we have a Boyer model of scholarship at our campus. All of this stuff counts as research. We can count all of this under research subject to caveats I'll lay out in just a moment. But as I look at my department, here I am doing the Scholarship of Teaching. I have one particular colleague who studies local government, doesn't publish much, but I don't think there's a local government in southeastern Michigan that he has not advised. I don't think there's a local government conference he hasn't spoken at. I have another colleague who's written a best-selling textbook in American government, taking the broad field, integrating it into a text. And I have many colleagues who are doing regular, standard research, scholarship of discovery. We all need to figure out on our own, how do we value these things? How do we count them? No doubt about that. But Boyer suggests that these types of things all involve scholarly work. It's not like when we do scholarship of teaching, we're shutting off our research side of the brain and not doing anything. It's research, different research. In the follow-up to Scholarship Reconsidered, Glassick, Huber, and Mayroff wrote Scholarship Assessed. I'll just put this list up here. All forms of scholarship require the following: clear goals, adequate preparation, etc. When I think of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, or when I think of the Scholarship of Application or Integration, I always look at that and say, does that describe my work? Does that describe the work my colleagues are doing? Because all scholarship has to hit basically these benchmarks. And if you do, let's count it. What the heck? And if not, well, bad scholarship in any area is bad scholarship. We all know that. And some of us might even admit to having produced bad scholarship every so often. None of you, of course.